Evelyn stood barefoot in the early morning dew, her fingers gently brushing the velvety petals of her favorite rose bush. The garden was her sanctuary. 3 decades of patient care and tender pruning had transformed this patch of earth into a blooming tapestry that neighbors admired from afar. The sun's soft rays filtered through the maple trees, casting dappled shadows on her weathered hands. For Evelyn, this quiet morning ritual was a ritual of peace, a silent testament to the years she'd invested in this home. The home she had built long before the neighborhood's homeowners association even existed. The sudden chime of the doorbell jolted her from her reverie. She wiped her hands on her apron and went inside, surprised to find no one on the porch, only a crisp white envelope resting on the welcome mat. The return address caught her eye immediately. Willow Creek HOA board. Her heart skipped. She'd heard whispers about the HOA's tightening grip in recent months, but had stayed out of their politics, confident her tenure and reputation would shield her. Curiosity warred with unease as she slit the envelope open and pulled out the letter. "Dear resident," it began, cold and official. "It has come to the board's attention that your property violates Section 12, Clause 4B of the Willow Creek Community Guidelines, specifically pertaining to unauthorized garden modifications. You are hereby notified to remove all non-compliant landscaping features within 14 days or face penalties, including fines and potential legal action." Evelyn blinked. She reread the letter, disbelief sinking in. Unauthorized garden modifications. Her roses. The very same bushes she had planted herself, under the watchful eye of neighbors who had complimented her care for years. She scanned for signatures, but found only the name of the HOA president, a man she'd never met. A tight knot formed in her stomach. Something was off. The letter continued with stern warnings. Failure to comply would result in escalating consequences, including liens placed against her property, possible eviction proceedings, and restrictions on community amenities. The tone was chilling, an unyielding ultimatum. But Evelyn had lived here through storms far worse than bureaucratic letters. She folded the paper carefully, her mind racing. Had the HOA really gone this far? Why now? And more unsettling, why had no one else spoken up? She stepped outside again, scanning the street. Her neighbors were busy with their own mornings, seemingly oblivious, yet a flicker of doubt gnawed at her. Her best friend Margaret had been vocal about the HOA's recent overreach. Evelyn decided to call her immediately. Margaret's voice on the phone was shaky, but urgent. "Evelyn, I got one too. They're cracking down on anyone who doesn't toe the line. It's like they want to push out the old guard, people like us. The new board thinks they can rewrite history, erase us." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "We've lived here longer than that HOA has even been around. They can't just erase us." "But that's exactly what they want to try," Margaret said, lowering her voice. "Rumor is there's some big developer behind all this. Wants to buy up the land and turn our neighborhood into condos or something." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. A developer? She thought of the abandoned lot at the corner, the ones that had resisted every attempt at sale. Could this be the beginning of something far more sinister? The letter lay heavy in her hand as she looked back at her roses, their delicate petals trembling in the breeze. This wasn't just a garden dispute. It was a battle for her home, her history, her rights, and Evelyn was not about to back down. The quiet neighborhood suddenly felt like a cage, the gentle morning replaced by a storm on the horizon, one that threatened to uproot everything she held dear. The days after the letter arrived were a blur of whispered conversations and guarded glances. Evelyn's usual morning strolls through. The neighborhood felt different now. shadows seemed longer, the smiles more forced. Word spread quickly that she wasn't the only one targeted. Several long-time residents had received similar notices, many about minor or even non-existent violations. One afternoon, Evelyn met with Margaret at the small cafe just off Willow Creek's main street. The air between them was thick with unease as they sipped their coffee, glancing nervously over their shoulders. "They're targeting anyone who's been here before the HOA was formed," Margaret said, lowering her voice. "Old-timers like us, the ones who remember what this place was before all the rules. They think if they pressure us enough, we'll just give up and sell out." Evelyn's jaw clenched. "But why now? What changed?" Margaret pulled out her phone, swiping through a series of news articles. "There's talk about some mysterious buyer, a corporation that wants to turn Willow Creek into high-rise condos and commercial space. The new board members are connected. To them, friends, business partners. They're slowly tightening control to force people out." Evelyn stared at the screen. The idea was shocking and terrifying. The neighborhood she had called home for more than 30 years was suddenly at risk of being erased. That evening, Evelyn sat in her dimly lit living room, her eyes scanning the HOA's official website. It was suddenly full of new bylaws and amendments, dense legalese that seemed designed to confuse and intimidate. Among them was a clause restricting modifications to front yards, and another limiting the types of fences residents could erect. Her gaze landed on the names of the current board members, most of whom had appeared just in the last 2 years. None of the familiar faces from the neighborhood's past. A chill ran down her spine. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Evelyn began quietly talking to neighbors who had remained silent. One by one, she heard the same story, a pattern of escalating demands, notices of violation for trivial matters, fines piling up. The HOA was not just enforcing rules, it was weaponizing them. She learned that at the last board meeting, which she had never been invited to, a motion passed to impose restrictions that only served the interests of outside investors. Those investors weren't interested in preserving the community, they wanted to profit. That night, Evelyn's phone buzzed with an anonymous text message. "Be careful who you trust. Not everyone in the HOA is who they seem." No signature, no explanation. Her breath caught. Was someone warning her or threatening her? The next morning, Evelyn found her garden gate slightly ajar. When she was sure she had locked it the night before, her heart pounded as she checked the perimeter. Nothing seemed missing, but the subtle sign was enough to tell her she was being watched. Evelyn's suspicions grew, but she refused to let fear win. She organized a small gathering of her closest neighbors in her living room. With hushed voices and determined eyes, they shared their stories and their fears. "We can't let them push us out," Evelyn said firmly. "This is our home. We know these streets better than anyone. We have history here. They want to erase that history, but we're still here." Her words sparked a flicker of courage in the room. But just as hope began to kindle, the room's door creaked open slightly. Everyone froze. Margaret, standing near the window, looked out into the darkened street. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "A black SUV. It's been circling the block for hours." The neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't paranoia. Something was stirring in the shadows. As the sun set beyond the trees, Evelyn realized that the battle for her rights and the soul of Willow Creek had only just begun. That night, Evelyn lay awake in bed, the letter's words swirling in her mind like a storm. She couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA's sudden aggression was no accident. There was something deeper, a hidden agenda lurking beneath the surface of their tidy rules and polite letters. The next morning, Before dawn had even touched the sky, Evelyn slipped out of her house, clutching a flashlight and a small stack of notebooks. She had made a decision. If the HOA wanted a fight, she would meet them head-on with facts and history. Her destination was the town archives, a dusty old building tucked behind the library. It was a place few visited anymore, a treasure trove of records, deeds, and maps dating back over a century. Evelyn had spent countless afternoons there, years ago, researching the origins of her home. But tonight, she had a new mission. The archives were locked tight, so Evelyn had borrowed a key from a trusted friend who worked at the library. With a quiet click, the heavy door swung open. The musty smell of aged paper greeted her, mingled with the faint hum of fluorescent lights. She made her way to the records section, her footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet. She pulled open filing cabinets and dusted off folders, searching for anything that mentioned the Willow Creek HOA. After an hour of digging, she found it. A thin folder labeled Willow Creek Subdivision Covenants, 1995. Her heart raced as she pulled out brittle pages, scanning the faded text. The HOA had been formed less than 10 years ago, with little community input, and most importantly, the covenants clearly stated that no newly formed association could override the rights of homeowners who had lived there prior to its formation. The revelation was electric. The HOA's attempts to rewrite rules were not just unfair, they were possibly illegal. As Evelyn flipped through more documents, her eyes caught a series of signatures, none from current board members, but from past residents who had resisted forming an HOA at all. She realized the current board was trying to steamroll history, erasing decades of precedent to suit their agenda. Suddenly, a noise behind her made her freeze. The soft creak of floorboards echoed in the quiet room. She spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Hello," she called, heart pounding. No response. The archives were supposed to be empty at this hour. Evelyn's mind raced. Was it a janitor, a security guard, or someone else entirely? She tucked the documents into her bag and moved cautiously towards the exit, every step feeling heavier. As she approached the door, a shadow detached itself from the far corner. A man in a dark coat, his face obscured, looking for something. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but carried a sharp edge. Evelyn squared her shoulders, refusing to show fear. "Just some public records." The man stepped closer. "Careful what you dig up. Some things are better left buried." She didn't flinch. "I'm only interested in the truth." He studied her for a moment, then turned away, disappearing into the shadows. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her heart still hammering. Whoever that was, the warning only confirmed she was onto something much bigger. Back home, Evelyn spread the documents out on her kitchen table, tracing the names and dates with trembling fingers. The pieces were falling into place. The HOA's power was built on shaky foundations, and their sudden crackdown was a desperate attempt to silence those who remembered. She knew she couldn't fight this battle alone. She needed allies, proof, and a plan. As the clock ticked past midnight, Evelyn's phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "We're watching. Stop now, or you'll regret it." Her resolve hardened. Whoever wanted to scare her was only lighting a fire. Evelyn was ready to fight for her home, no matter the cost. The shadows around Willow Creek were closing in, but Evelyn's roots ran deeper than any of them could imagine. The following evening, the Willow Creek Community Center buzzed with an undercurrent of tension as residents gathered for what was supposed to be a routine HOA meeting. But Evelyn knew better. This was going to be a showdown. The room was crowded, the air thick with whispered conversations and guarded glances. Long time. Neighbors sat side by side with newer residents, the atmosphere crackling with unease. At the front, the HOA board had set up a stern panel, their faces impassive beneath harsh fluorescent lights. Evelyn's eyes locked onto the HOA president, a slick man named Richard Conway. He wore a sharp suit and a practiced smile, but his eyes were cold, calculating. She knew this was more than a meeting. This was a power play. When the president opened the floor, Evelyn didn't hesitate. Standing tall, her voice clear and steady, she spoke up. I want to address the recent letters and fines being sent to long-time residents. Many of us have lived here for decades, well before the HOA existed. Your sudden enforcement of rules that didn't exist before is not just unfair, it's a violation of our rights. Richard's smile tightened. Mrs. Harper, the rules apply to everyone equally. The HOA exists to maintain the community standards and property values. But these rules were created without our consent, Evelyn countered, holding up the documents she had uncovered from the town archives. And legally, you can't enforce them retroactively against homeowners who were here before the HOA was formed. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some residents nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. Richard waved off the objections. The board has the authority, and we will enforce the rules. Compliance is non-negotiable. Before Evelyn could respond, a sharp gasp came from the back of the room. Margaret hurried forward, holding up her phone. I have recordings of conversations between some board members and a developer who wants to buy out our neighborhood, turn Willow Creek into condos. They've been planning this all along. A shocked silence fell. Suddenly the tension snapped. Richard's face darkened. That's a lie and a breach of privacy. This meeting is adjourned. As he banged his gavel, several board members began to shout over the crowd. Evelyn's heart pounded. This was the moment she had feared, but also the moment she'd been preparing for. Outside the building later, Evelyn noticed something unsettling. Her garden gate was splattered with red paint, an obvious act of vandalism. Her roses, so carefully nurtured, were splattered with harsh streaks. The message was clear: back down or face consequences. Evelyn felt a cold rage rise inside her. This wasn't just about rules anymore. It was intimidation, pure and simple, determined. She called the local police to report the vandalism, but their response was lukewarm. Without clear suspects, it's hard to act, the officer said. Maybe it's just neighborhood kids, but Evelyn knew better. This was no random act. It was a warning. That night, as she stood by the damaged gate, her phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. A voice, low and distorted, whispered, "Stop digging, Evelyn. You're out of your depth." She slammed the phone down, her hands trembling. Instead of fear, a fierce determination took hold. If intimidation was their weapon, Evelyn's was her will to fight. She would not be silenced. Back inside, she gathered her documents, phone recordings, and photographs of the vandalism. Her next step was clear. She needed allies outside the neighborhood, people who could help her expose the HOA's true agenda and protect the rights of her community. The battle lines were drawn, and Evelyn was ready to stand at the front. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, the dim light casting long shadows over the growing stack of papers, photos, and recordings. The vandalism on her gate had rattled the neighborhood, but it had only fueled her resolve. She knew she couldn't face this alone. The HOA's reach was wide, and their pockets deep. Her first call was to Lisa Chen, a young, tenacious lawyer she'd met briefly at a community seminar years ago. Lisa had a reputation for taking on big corporations and winning. When Evelyn explained the situation, Lisa's voice was firm. "This sounds like classic intimidation. You have proof of overreach and corruption. We can fight this. Next, Evelyn reached out to Daniel Reed, an investigative journalist known for exposing shady dealings in small towns. Daniel's eyes gleamed with interest when Evelyn handed him the recordings and documents she'd collected. This is a gold mine. If what you say is true, we can blow this wide open. The trio agreed to meet at the local library, a neutral ground away from prying HOA eyes. As they gathered around a cluttered table, Evelyn laid out the evidence, the forged rules, the secret meetings, the developer's involvement, and the intimidation tactics. Lisa nodded thoughtfully. The HOA's actions are illegal on multiple fronts. They violated homeowners' rights, and these recordings could be the smoking gun in court. Daniel pulled out his notebook. But exposing this publicly will put Evelyn in the crosshairs. We need to be smart about timing and how we release information. Just then, a soft knock interrupted their planning session. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Standing at the door was Thomas Gallagher, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and cautious eyes. "I'm with you," he said quietly. "I'm on the HOA board, but I don't agree with this takeover. They've twisted everything we stood for." Evelyn's gaze narrowed. Could she trust him? His timing seemed too convenient. Thomas continued, "I've been collecting evidence from inside. I want to help you stop this before it's too late." Lisa exchanged a wary glance with Evelyn. If he's genuine, his insider info could be invaluable. Over the next few days, Thomas shared detailed records of backroom deals, emails, and meeting minutes showing the collusion between the HOA board and the developer. His information confirmed the worst. The HOA was systematically dismantling residents' rights to force a buyout, but as their alliance strengthened, so did the dangers. Late one night, Evelyn's car was keyed down the driver's side. Another warning. Daniel's article was ready, but held back, awaiting the right moment to publish. Lisa was preparing legal filings. Evelyn's phone buzzed constantly with anonymous threats and cryptic texts. Despite the risks, Evelyn found unexpected strength in her new allies. Together, they began organizing the neighborhood for a public protest, rallying residents tired of fear and silence. On the day of the protest, a crowd gathered in the town square, holding signs and chanting for justice. Cameras from local news stations captured the scene. But amidst the hopeful voices, Evelyn couldn't shake a gnawing doubt. One of their own had to be watching, someone ready to undermine them from within. As the protest reached its peak, a black SUV parked near the edge of the crowd caught Evelyn's eye. Its tinted windows shielded whoever was inside. The same vehicle she'd seen lurking weeks ago. Her pulse quickened. The battle was no longer just legal or political. It had become personal. Evelyn met Margaret's gaze across the crowd. They exchanged a silent vow. No matter what came next, they would stand their ground, because some roots were too deep to be torn out. The morning after the protest, Willow Creek awoke to a storm. Not of rain, but of mounting tension. The local news had picked up Daniel's story, and headlines blasted accusations of corruption and intimidation within the HOA. The community was buzzing. The lines between friend and foe blurred more than ever. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands, as she read the comments flooding social media. Support poured in from neighbors, but so did venomous attacks from anonymous accounts defending the HOA and its shadowy allies. Then came the phone call that made her blood run cold. Evelyn Harper. A cold voice whispered, "You've stirred up a hornet's nest. Step back, or the consequences won't be just pain on your gate." Before she could respond, the line went dead. She swallowed her fear and pressed forward, aware now more than ever that the stakes had escalated beyond letters and threats. This was war. Over the next week, Evelyn and her allies worked tirelessly, filing legal complaints, gathering signatures for a community recall of the HOA board, and meeting secretly to avoid surveillance. Yet, despite their efforts, strange incidents kept happening. Margaret's mailbox was emptied of important documents. Lisa's car was found with slashed tires. Thomas's home was broken into, though nothing seemed stolen. Just a clear message. One evening, as Evelyn returned from a meeting with the lawyer and journalist, she noticed a small package resting on her porch. There was no return address. Carefully, she brought it inside. Inside the box was a USB drive, wrapped in a note. "You want the truth? Here it is. But be warned, some truths will burn." Her hands trembled as she plugged the drive into her laptop. The screen filled with dozens of files, emails, contracts, and recordings that detailed a sprawling conspiracy. The HOA board members were not only colluding with the developer, but also had ties to a network of politicians and real estate moguls eager to capitalize on the neighborhood's destruction. One file caught her eye, a video recording from a private HOA meeting, where Richard Conway explicitly instructed board members to use intimidation tactics to pressure longtime residents into selling their homes cheaply. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she watched the cold, calculating faces of the people who had tried to erase her rights. But then, her eyes narrowed. One of the voices in the video wasn't just a board member. It was Thomas. Betrayal cut deeper than any threat. Her phone vibrated again, a text from an unknown number. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" Evelyn felt the walls closing in. Had Thomas been working for them all along? Or was there more to his story? She needed answers. And fast. The next day, Evelyn confronted Thomas at a quiet cafe. His face was grave, tired. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he admitted. "I joined the board to stop them from the inside, but they're stronger than I thought. When they found out I was leaking information, they threatened my family." Evelyn studied him, weighing every word. His fear was real, but so was the danger he represented to their cause. "We need you," she said finally. "But no more secrets." Thomas nodded solemnly. Agreed. Together, they devised a new plan to expose the corruption fully by taking the evidence to the state attorney general. It was risky, but it was their best shot at breaking the HOA's grip for good. As Evelyn prepared the documents for submission, a knock came at her door. She opened it slowly. Standing there was a familiar face from the neighborhood, a young woman she hadn't noticed before. "I want to help," the woman said, her eyes fierce. "I've seen what they're capable of." Evelyn felt a surge of hope. The fight was far from over, but the tide was turning. In the shadows of Willow Creek, the web of control was unraveling, but the cost of freedom was just beginning to show. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of tense meetings, legal battles, and mounting pressure on the Willow Creek HOA. Evelyn, Thomas, Lisa, Daniel, and the newly joined ally, Sophia, the fierce young woman with a sharp mind and unyielding spirit, worked tirelessly to prepare their case for the state attorney general. But the resistance wasn't without its price. One evening, as Evelyn returned home from a late meeting, she found her front porch engulfed in a harsh glare of headlights. A car was parked there, engine running, windows tinted so dark they seemed like black mirrors. Her heart pounded. The neighborhood had never felt so threatening. Suddenly, the car sped away, leaving behind the acrid scent of burning rubber. Evelyn's nerves were raw. Inside, her phone vibrated with a new message. "Last warning, stop now, or worse comes." But Evelyn was no longer the frightened homeowner she'd once been. The fire of resistance burned too brightly. The next day, the state Attorney General's office confirmed receipt of their complaint. The news spread like wildfire. The HOA board members, sensing their grip slipping, launched a fierce campaign to discredit Evelyn and her allies, accusing them of fabricating evidence and stirring unrest. Neighbors began to take sides, fracturing the community. Longtime friends whispered behind closed doors, torn between loyalty and fear. At a town hall meeting called to address the turmoil, Evelyn stood before the crowd, her voice steady but passionate. "We have the right to protect our homes, our histories, and our futures," she declared. "This fight isn't just for us. It's for every family that calls Willow Creek home." But as she spoke, a sudden commotion erupted at the back of the hall. A group of unfamiliar men pushed their way inside, their demeanor hostile. Security moved in, but not before Evelyn caught a chilling glimpse. The men wore badges, law enforcement, but not local. The crowd grew uneasy. Who had called in these outsiders, and why? After the meeting, Evelyn learned the men were federal agents investigating complaints about illegal activities linked to the developer and the HOA. The stakes had just escalated beyond local politics, but the reprieve was short-lived. That night, Evelyn's house was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but files and evidence were rifled through, scattered across the floor like a message. She realized the battle wasn't just about rules. It was a war over truth itself. Despite the fear, the community began to rally. More neighbors spoke out, inspired by Evelyn's courage. The divide was clear, but so was the resolve. In a final desperate move, Richard Conway called for an emergency HOA meeting, attempting to pass a motion that would strip longtime residents of voting rights and cement control with new buyers. Evelyn and her allies mobilized quickly, rallying enough votes to block the motion. As the meeting ended, Richard's face twisted in fury. "This isn't over," he hissed. Evelyn met his gaze, unflinching. "No, it's just beginning." The shadows of Willow Creek had been cast into the light, but the fight for justice was far from over. And Evelyn knew one thing for certain. She would stand firm, no matter what darkness came next. The air in Willow Creek was thick with anticipation as the final hearing at the state attorney general's office approached. Evelyn, her allies, and a growing number of residents prepared to face the board's last desperate attempts to cling to power. The hearing room was packed. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes, and the tension was palpable. Evelyn sat beside Lisa, Thomas, Daniel, and Sophia, each a pillar of strength in a battle that had consumed their lives. When it was Evelyn's turn to speak, she rose steadily, her voice ringing clear across the room. "This fight has never been about property, lines or paint colors," she said. "It's about respect for the people who built this community long before the HOA's shadow fell upon us. It's about standing up against those who would erase our history and our rights for their profit." She laid out the evidence, the forged covenants, the secret deals, the intimidation, the vandalism, and played the damning video of the board's meeting. The room grew silent, but then came the unexpected. Richard Conway, the embattled HOA president, rose to respond. His face was pale, his usual confidence shaken. "Before you decide, there's something you all should know," he said, voice cracking. "I wasn't acting alone. This was orchestrated by a group far beyond this community. Developers, investors, politicians, people who wanted to make Willow Creek disappear to build something else." A collective gasp spread through the room. Richard hesitated, then continued. "I'm cooperating with authorities now. There's a bigger corruption ring, and they'll be exposed. The HOA board members you see before you were pawns in a much larger game. Evelyn felt a strange mix of shock and vindication. The conspiracy was deeper than she imagined, but at least it was unraveling. The Attorney General's office announced that a full investigation into the developers' network and its political connections would proceed. Meanwhile, the HOA's illegal actions were voided and the rights of long-term residents restored. Back in Willow Creek, the victory was bittersweet. The neighborhood had been fractured, trust tested, and scars left behind. But in the quiet moments, Evelyn saw signs of healing. Neighbors chatting over fences, children playing freely, gardens blooming again. One afternoon, as Evelyn tended to her roses, now recovered from the pain attack, Margaret approached with a small envelope from the new neighborhood committee. She smiled. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for standing your ground. Willow Creek is home because of you." Evelyn's heart swelled. She glanced around at the familiar faces passing by, the trees that had witnessed generations, and the street she'd called home longer than the HOA ever existed. She knew the fight for justice wasn't always neat or easy. Sometimes, the roots had to be dug up and strengthened to survive storms. But in the end, those roots refused to break, and neither would she.